Thanks, guys. We've got Jason Traff here with us up next for our next live guest. He's the president and the co-founder of Shipwell. Jason, thank you for joining us on FreightWaves Now this morning. We're glad to have you.
Thank you so much.
So you are the president and the co-founder of Shipwell, and you guys are really focused on reducing food waste when it comes to transportation. Super important topic, especially as a lot of people are dealing with food insecurity. Talk to us about what you do at Shipwell and how you guys are helping improve this situation.
It's absolutely right. So, 1 out of 10 Americans faced food insecurity in the past year. And Shipwell's connected platform helps shippers take full control over their logistics operations. That means giving them the tools to navigate volatile markets and reduce operating expenses. One of those significant operating expenses being food waste.
And so when we talk about food waste, we're not necessarily talking about things like spoilage or like these big problems because that doesn't really happen, right? You're not losing entire reefer trailers full of food, right? You're talking about these small scale things and the small steps that we can take to make a really big difference. Give us some examples of some of those smaller steps.
Absolutely. And I think for some people that work in transportation, they absolutely have experienced losing whole reefer trailers. So when we focus on how we reduce food waste, so much of that's how we take a shipper, connect their entire supply chain together, and give them tools, whether it's in manufacturing, transportation, or the final delivery of goods, to understand if things are still temperature controlled and on time.
Very interesting. Yeah, I have actually lost food before. I lost an entire freezer container of lobsters in the port of Miami's, which didn't come
It's an
to a very
expensive
good
trailer to lose.
outcome. And very smelly trailer. That's how we found it, was the smell eventually. But 30 to 40% is lost every
Mhm.
year, waste. What is the number one reason for that waste?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. Food waste across the U.S. When you look at the entire production system of food, it has the same carbon footprint as the airline industry. So on a global scale, there's something like 4.5 billion pounds, billion tons of carbon dioxide that are created, and that's about 8% of total global emissions, which is almost equivalent to global road transport emissions. So when you start looking at climate change or any of these larger topics, the ability to give companies the tools to improve their bottom line, absolutely, and be a better global citizen. um, these are things that we see with real-time visibility, becoming more connected in the supply chain, and then real-time sensing and alerts.
And so we talk a lot about that visibility aspect, right? And obviously, when you have stuff that is temperature sensitive, time sensitive, it is incredibly crucial to have it where it needs to go, when it needs to go there. Talk to us about some of those visibility tools that you guys are using at Shipwell and how you're even providing some of that visibility to these clients of yours to make sure that they're not incurring this loss.
Yeah, visibility is huge. Shipwell officially connects to trucks something like over 6 different ways. It's everything from ELDs to APIs to EDI. And so much of it is how we connect all these disparate systems and then surface it in a real time dashboard where we can start to sense when things go wrong using machine learning. An example of this would be a few years ago at FreightWaves Live, we demoed a natural language processing technology where we could automate a check call to truckers. We can do the same thing today, but we can tie it to maybe a sensor on a reefer trailer. And then you can say something like, well, if I haven't had a reading on that in, let's say, 3 or 4 hours, and I don't want to find a container full of smelly lobsters, maybe I should call the trucker and say, hey, is your reefer working? And I think this is the really practical way that we're starting to see machine language, we're starting to see real time sensing come full circle, so that companies can actually achieve the sort of the dream that they want of getting proactive in their supply chain.
It's amazing to me when you talk about this. 8% of the greenhouse gases is
Mhm.
because of the waste. You would think there would be much more focus on this because you're
Right.
talking about food that also needs to get to people who are starving,
Mhm.
right? There's a lot of this is uh, obviously an international issue, but where is that breakdown? Is it just the visibility that is the breakdown that is causing this waste, or is there other things that you connect with for the efficiencies of moving and pickup, et cetera?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. So you're right that there's about $1 trillion lost in the global economy every year. Because developed nations consume so much of the food, almost two-thirds of that comes from areas like North America and Western Europe. So food waste in Europe and North America is 10 times higher than sort of sub-Saharan Africa, India, Southeast Asia. So it's very much a localized problem, even though it's a global issue. When we start looking at the issues behind it, You're absolutely right that there's some things around like food manufacturing, how efficient you are with that first mile part of the supply chain. The part that Shipwell really focuses on is the distribution of the goods. So
Mhm.
not only are there things in transportation you can start to get proactive for, things like your lobster story, but also things like network design and center of gravity. So we work with a really popular meal kit company, and one of the issues they had was they couldn't ship from their manufacturing facility in New Jersey all the way down to the tip of Florida in 2 days to sort of meet their timelines. And so once you start to connect your supply chain together, you can start to understand where that center of gravity is starting to shift, so you can just become better at distributing. And this has a very tangible aspect on the wastage that you'll see just because delays in supply chains are inevitable in some way.
So, Jason, you mentioned that partnership with that meal kit service. Have you guys seen any major changes in the markets or in the industry as these other meal kit services have really increased in demand? You've got the Hello Fresh, you've got the Blue
Mhm.
Plates, you've got all of these. One of the really, really interesting ones that I've learned about recently is a service called Misfit, and it's where you get these vegetables and these fruits that
Oh
come
yeah.
directly to your door that maybe people didn't want. So that's one way of eliminating that waste, is kind of getting your scraps or the things that people weren't good enough to sell in the grocery stores, right, to your doorstep. But talk about what it takes to kind of keep up with this demand as more people are expecting the grocery delivery to their doorstep, either from like Amazon delivery, Whole Foods delivery, etc.
Yeah, so Shipwell, as the youngest company on the Gartner Magic Quadrant for transportation management systems by something like 20 years, one of the things that we're really adept at is working with fast up and coming brands. So a lot of the companies that you mentioned. And so for us, what this means is a lot of the shift we saw during COVID was from brick and mortar distribution to retail stores into direct to consumer. We work with a lot of those brands, and for many of them, they grew between 3 to 10x in the past year. And so that meant that they either had to staff up or invest in technology to be able to keep up with that. We are seeing a trend, though, and I think it's part of the broader consumerism where people are more concerned with the brands that they interact with and how they personally identify with them. And for a lot of people, things like sustainability, being a good global citizen, these are things they want to see in the brands that they consume and brands that they trust. And so I think that this goes past the balance sheet, it goes past the carbon footprint, and also ties back into what people are looking for today.
And so we talk a lot about the brands aiming for that sustainability aspect because they know that it's a draw to consumers, right? Ethical consumerism is something that a lot of people are focused on, and they're going to put their money where their morals are at some point. Do you guys see that brands are more likely to interact with you because they see you as advantageous when it comes to attracting consumers, because they say, hey, we're partnering with this group, Shipwell, whose focus is on reducing waste, increasing sustainability overall. That makes us more of a sustainability focused company. So bring your business to us.
Yeah, I think we definitely see that as a trend. And, I think you have to look past the virtue signaling. I mean, we are very focused on food waste because we think it's an important, just global issue. But I think for a lot of companies, it comes in line with their broader goals as a company, which is to improve their balance sheet, improve their go to market. I mean, for so many of these food and beverage companies, they operate on, let's call it, a 5% margin. So every dollar that we can save through reducing transportation costs or eliminating food waste, that can be something like $20 of equivalent revenue. And so not only can they be a better global citizen, but they can actually become a much stronger company and a much stronger brand through working with a company like Shipwell.
Excellent stuff. So as we're talking about this, and you talk about the economics, and obviously it goes in line with the balance sheets of these of the manufacturing, the food industry. As we switched from grocery store or restaurant consumption and service consumption to grocery store and then back again, are you seeing a little bit of a different building out of the supply chain for those two, kind of melding them together? Because part of that issue that we went through with the pandemic was the inability to switch from the
Mhm.
commercial packaging to the consumer packaging. Are you seeing any trends there at all?
Absolutely. I think if the past year taught us anything, it's that brittle supply chains aren't going to be the supply chains of the future. And so I think a lot of the investment that companies are making in their supply chains are in technology services like Shipwell, where you become more real time and more connected. Because I think it's less about a direct shift, either through distribution models or locations, and more about real time sensing and demand. And I think this, I mean, obviously, we stay very close to the reefer truckload market where we've just seen general tightening over the past year, but we've also seen these one-off events, whether it's a Suez Canal, the ports across the U.S., where there will be disruptions. And so regardless of how that distribution model changes, I think companies are getting more adept at being able to switch how they distribute goods on the fly. And I think when we look forward, this is a trend that we see continuing.
Awesome, Jason. Great stuff coming out of Shipwell from you guys. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.